Thanks very much. So, want to talk to you a little bit today about our project Moonbeam. But in order to talk about Moonbeam, it's pretty hard to do that without also talking about Polkadot a little bit. That's kind of the context in which we've created our project. So I wanted to start. Polkadot is a complex system. I'm going to do my best to kind of distill it down to what I think are the key ideas in Polkadot that will provide some context for our project and what we're up to. And so I wanted to start with this question, pretty straightforward question: what is the best blockchain? And this is a question that people get pretty excited about. They have their blockchain of choice. They say, mine's faster, mine's more secure, mine's more decentralized. You'll get some, blood will go up, and you'll get some pretty heated discussion on this topic. And the reason why I start with this question is, this question is specifically a question that when you have the Polkadot state of mind, or kind of mindset, this does not have an answer. There is not a single answer to this question. And I think a Polkadot person would say it's kind of misguided to think that there can be one answer to this question. There's a series of trade-offs in all sorts of different directions. And so I think the Polkadot answer is that there are many best blockchains. It's totally dependent on what you're trying to do. Right? It's dependent on the use cases you're trying to serve. A storage-optimized blockchain is going to look different than one that's optimized for a lot of transaction throughput, as an example. And so there's space to have, the goal is not to try to find one blockchain that can meet all the use cases out there in the world. The Polkadot idea is, let's create an environment where we can have many of these things. So the Polkadot idea is, let's create a framework, the substrate framework, where you can build blockchains that are specific to your use case, and then let's connect them all together so they can kind of interoperate and speak with each other. And really, for a complicated system, that is the core idea. The core idea behind Polkadot is, let's have an environment, let's give people the tools to create their own specialized blockchains, and create an environment where those specialized blockchains can talk to each other. And based on just that simple idea, you get these kind of very powerful network effects start to happen. Because you don't have to, unlike when you're just a standalone blockchain, you don't have to worry about things you don't want to be good at. You specialize in one thing, and you can rely on other chains to provide the services that you don't really care about that much, that are specialized for those other purposes. So I think that the system as a whole is definitely set up to create these larger network effects as different blockchains are kind of interacting with each other. And so that's kind of a context for explaining what Moonbeam is. So Moonbeam is one of these specialized blockchains on Polkadot. But what we've done is we've done a from-scratch Ethereum implementation in this substrate development framework. And so what that means is, we've created an environment that looks and feels very much like Ethereum does. Same EVM, has similar EVM functionality. We've collaborated quite closely with Parity, the team behind Polkadot, on creating this environment. And it means you can use all the same tools that people are used to using, right? So developers can use all the familiar tools they're used to, things like MetaMask. And so the experience is very much like you would find on, call it Matic, BSC, these other chains that are Ethereum compatible. But because we're a parachain on Polkadot, there's unique things that we can do that if you just have a straight Ethereum clone, you can't do. So we'll get to those. We'll get to those in a little bit. So we've engaged with a whole bunch of people at this point in terms of building and deploying to Moonbeam. And so a lot of the content of this talk comes from these conversations that I've had with quite a few project teams at this point, infrastructure providers, API providers, and protocol teams. One thing that's not noted on the slides is we did launch kind of the sister network to Moonbeam about 6 weeks ago. So there's something called Moonriver. That's our deployment to Kusama, which, for those of you that aren't familiar, Kusama is kind of this companion network to Polkadot. And when you're in the Polkadot ecosystem, a lot of teams actually will have this dual deployment structure where they'll have a deployment to Kusama and a deployment to Polkadot. So we launched this Moonriver deployment about 6 weeks ago. And yeah, there's been quite a bit of interest in that time. I looked this morning before the talk to have some numbers for you. I think there's been about 2.5 million transactions in the last 6 weeks. Organically, there's about over 200 million in TVL, deposited into various DeFi protocols that have sprung up. There's a number of NFT projects as well. There's about 125K wallet addresses. So pretty substantive activity for a 6-week-old blockchain. And we're heading in shortly to the launch of the main Moonbeam network that will be deployed onto Polkadot as the parachain auctions start on Polkadot. That's the process by which a project team actually becomes one of these parachains. So that's just context around where some of the ideas in this talk came from. And if I divide the project teams into a couple categories, I would say there's one way to divide them into two. So we're working with a number of teams that are pursuing kind of a multi-chain expansion, is what I call it. That's something that's pretty prevalent these days. You may have a project team. To name a few, we've been working quite closely with the team at Sushi, as well as Cream Finance, Lido as well. And they may have started on Ethereum originally, but all of them are in the process of expanding out to multiple chains. I mean, they see the world is moving into kind of a multi-chain environment. And for them, it's pretty simple, right? I mean, they're trying to maximize KPIs like TVL, DAU, MAU, right? So daily active users, monthly active users. I mean, they're running their protocols like a software business, and they need to expand. So they're looking for new markets to attack, and that's what's leading to a multi-chain expansion. And when they're doing that, note that it's really these EVM-compatible chains are the ones that are getting the most of the traction. And the reason for that is simple. It's because that's the implementation they had. And so by targeting EVM chains, you don't have to change a lot. It's not a whole re-implementation effort. You can just deploy your existing code onto things like BSC, Polygon. And I think for people trying to get to the Polkadot ecosystem, we're one of the logical destinations there. Because again, you don't have to change anything. So that's one category of team. But we are also seeing Polkadot native teams that are deploying. Building one of these parachains actually turns out to be pretty hard. You're building a blockchain, basically, right? So that's not for everyone, right? I mean, that's there's a lot of infrastructural work you have to do. There's a lot of incentivization of nodes to help produce blocks. There's a lot of pretty low-level things you have to do. So I think for a lot of teams that want just this smart contract kind of dApp-like experience, they're going to look to work with a team like us. And I think for anyone wanting the Ethereum-compatible kind of environment on Polkadot, we've picked up a lot of those collaborations. So I thought I'd comment a little bit on this experience we've had bootstrapping an ecosystem around this Ethereum-compatible environment. And one thing I would say that wasn't obvious at the start is that having an EVM is one thing. I mean, that takes effort to create one of those if you're going to create it from scratch, like we have. But it's really, there's quite a bit of tooling and other infrastructure you need around this core EVM to make for a complete environment that a developer will feel comfortable in. So I would say that that's something we've spent quite a bit of time on, doing integrations into things like oracles, indexing services. I saw the booth. The Graph has a booth over here, right across the hall. A multi, a Gnosis safe compatible multi-sig deployment. There's all these kind of infrastructural things that developers need that are not part of the EVM itself, but are kind of around it, that are needed to make for an environment that a developer feels good deploying into. So we've done quite a bit of that work. And then on this DeFi side, the interesting thing here is there's kind of this chicken and egg problem. So when you have an empty EVM and you're like, great, let's get DeFi projects to deploy here, that turns out to be kind of hard to do because they all depend on each other, right? I mean, you can go talk to a lending and borrowing protocol. They need oracles to support your platform, and they need an AMM to be there, right? They can't work without having an AMM also. But an AMM might not want to go there if they don't also have other ecosystem players, right, to work with. So you kind of have this problem where it's kind of all or nothing, right? It's hard to get any one person to move. You have to kind of talk to a whole bunch of people and get them to agree to move all at once. So that, I would say, took quite a bit of effort. That's something that I think we underestimated when we started this project. So I want to talk a little bit here about what makes us different. And so having an Ethereum-compatible environment, having an EVM, that's I think that's worked well for us in terms of getting additional adoption. And that's kind of the product that the developers that we were working with wanted. But there's a lot of those, right? I mean, there's a lot of Geth forks. There's a lot of different environments. So the question is, why? What is it that's special about Moonbeam? What is it that's unique about Moonbeam? And really, the thing that is special about Moonbeam comes from the fact that we are not only an EVM and Ethereum-compatible environment, but that we're also a parachain on Polkadot. So what does that give us? So by being a parachain on Polkadot, it goes back to the idea from the beginning of the talk. When you're a parachain on Polkadot, you can communicate with other chains that are also on Polkadot in this native and highly secure way. And I think this ability to communicate between chains that's built into Polkadot is a very powerful aspect of the system that many people don't really appreciate now because it's just coming to life now. And you can see it already, right? I think you're pretty hard pressed these days to say that we're not heading into a multi-chain kind of world, right? There's significant value and user adoption that's happened on a number of chains outside of Ethereum now. And I think as a result, there's a lot of bridging technologies out there, right? Because once you have a multi-chain environment, users are going to want to naturally move their assets and move between these different chains. So there's been this kind of explosion of different projects trying to address bridging scenarios. But I will say that these bridging scenarios, they're layered on top, right? So you have the base layer chains, and then you have an additional project layering additional security and other assumptions on top. And that can be okay, but it's definitely more risk in the system. And so I think that the thing about, and there's a couple examples of this, Polkadot being one, of kind of building in this networking layer directly into the protocol itself. So there's no additional security assumptions, right? You can basically interact with other chains with the same security that you're doing things on your own chain. And so that's kind of the critical feature that we're leveraging to extend the base functionality of the EVM in this Ethereum environment. So let me explain what I mean by that. So again, our system is built using this substrate framework. We have advanced functionality on our chain that doesn't exist on Ethereum. So we have things like a staking functionality, on-chain governance features. So what we've done is we've kind of allowed access to Ethereum developers to these advanced functions via precompiles. So these are kind of they look like smart contracts when you're inside of our EVM, but they're actually kind of accessing these advanced functions that don't exist on Ethereum. And so this is a strategy we're using to create a whole bunch of extensions to the base Ethereum functionality. So not just for staking and for governance, but also cross-chain functions. And so we have the first of these coming to market shortly. And there's a long list, a backlog of integrations with other project teams on Polkadot, which we'll be providing into our Ethereum environment. So to give one example here, for example, we're working with the team at Lido. For those of you that don't know, Lido makes a liquid staking protocol, a quite heavily adopted one on Ethereum. And so they want to build a Moonbeam application, but they want to control staking functionality that's on Polkadot itself, right? They want to be able to kind of remote control staking operations. So that's kind of what we're collaborating with them on, is kind of using this native networking so that they can have a local dApp in Moonbeam, but in a decentralized and trustless way, control staking operations. They can create liquid staking derivatives that would be on Polkadot. Because the relay chain itself, the Polkadot chain itself, doesn't have any developer or smart contract functionality. They have to work with someone like us to kind of get access, either build their own chain or work with someone like us to get access to this functionality. So I think that's a great example of kind of the power of this. And of course, there's a whole bunch of protocol teams that want tokens. So they want the DOT token itself and tokens from other chains in the ecosystem. They want access to those. So we have a whole bunch of integrations which allow for those tokens to be moved onto Moonbeam and represented there as a kind of special kind of ERC20. So it'll look like an ERC20, so they can be used inside of Sushi, inside of Cream, inside of all of these other protocols. And so that's a big motivation then for people to deploy to Moonbeam so they can get access to this whole ecosystem's assets. And so yeah, I think this idea starts to get at kind of the what's special, and I think there's going to be a lot of innovation here in this area around exposing functionality from other chains, in ways that are not kind of isolated, which has been the mode of operation to date. And if I kind of go back to the original picture here that I started with, this idea of Polkadot having these different specialized chains, I think this starts to get into the direction of where I think things are headed and what we're going to see in the coming, let's call it 3 to 4, maybe 5 years. And so that idea is that the mindset of everyone right now is still this kind of mono-chain mindset, right? It's I'm a developer, I'm building an app, I need to pick a chain, and I'm going to engineer and deploy my solution for that chain. I think that style of thinking is definitely going to change. You already see it changing, right? So even for NFT applications being built today, you already have things you might have the base contract deployed to something like Polygon to like actually like mint the NFT. And then the metadata might live on Arweave, let's say, right? That's where you put the JPEG itself or the other data about the NFT. So you kind of already have this, an application kind of spanning multiple blockchains that are each good at like specific tasks. So I kind of see that idea as really being the way forward, where on Polkadot even, right? There's a number of different teams pursuing different infrastructure services. So we have generic smart contracts, but there's different bridging teams providing Oracle services, teams providing identity services. And so really where I see things heading is that I think of it like almost like an AWS, right? It's like an AWS where there'll be a menu of options, except instead of being centralized services, they'll each be like blockchain-based services. So they'll be decentralized services. And these applications of the future will basically leverage multiple blockchains, functionality from multiple blockchains to create like their end user kind of effect, right? And then to meet their use cases. So that's kind of where I see, things heading, and that's, I think we have a role to play there in being kind of a generic compute component, right, with integrations to all of these different specialized chains. And this, Kusama, as I said, like the parachains have recently launched, and we're just heading right now into a phase where parachains will be launching like on Polkadot itself. That's going to be starting shortly. So I think there's going to be quite a bit of activity, around that, like from here through the end of the year. There's going to be quite a bit of activity. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you guys about. Obviously, we'd love to hear from you. There's links to our website. We have a quite active Discord for folks that are kind of builders or trying to build something. Yeah, and I'd love to. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to take those as well.
We got a girl here. Let me get right to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I was really interested in the use case you mentioned about, was it Lido Finance? Did I catch that right? About
Lido?
Lido,
yeah.
Right, and you mentioned about staking functionality. I was just wondering if you could expand on that a bit more.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting closer to the speaker here. Go ahead. What was the question again now?
It was really just whether you could expand on the use case that you have in connection with it seems like DeFi platforms like Lido.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that actually, if I look at where traction has happened, the primary area is in DeFi. So, we definitely have a number of different partners across several different DeFi categories. So those are AMMs, stable swaps, lending and borrowing protocols, and so on. Lido is one of those. So Lido being creating this liquid staking derivative, right, is what they do. So currently on Ethereum, they're the leading protocol right now that allows you to kind of have exposure to staking, but still not get locked up, right? You get this kind of derivative asset that represents staked ETH. And so they want to create. So the Lido team wants to expand to different protocols and kind of replicate the same idea. So Polkadot has a staking feature, so they want to create a liquid staking derivative on Polkadot. Kusama to start, and then Polkadot. Lido recently expanded to Solana as well, right? So there's a kind of a liquid staking derivative on Solana. So that's the nature of the Lido relationship. But I would say that in general, kind of assembling this DeFi ecosystem is consisted of trying to hit every category. You need all these different ingredients to make for a whole cake, basically. So on the AMMs, as I mentioned, that's what the team at Sushi we've been interacting with quite a bit. I mean, they have a whole DeFi portfolio now, right? I mean, they've gone well beyond AMMs. They now have Kashi, their lending and borrowing platform. They've got Bento Box. Then there's an NFT marketplace coming up soon. So quite a bit of activity there. And there's longtime partners of ours like Cream Finance who have a lending and borrowing market capability. So I think we'll see. We're already seeing, and we'll continue to see quite a bit of activity on the DeFi side. I think the thing that actually is quite surprising to me is that we launched this Moonriver network, and we had these partners lined up, and we're like, okay, great, there'll be an orderly process now. We'll deploy this infrastructure. But as soon as we launched it, there was 6 or 7 AMMs, and all this stuff started happening before we even had a chance to do any of that stuff. So this is where you realize there's quite a bit of demand for block space right now. For EVM compatible block space on that's credible, there's a huge amount of demand right now. If you provide it, it'll get filled basically. Is kind of is our take. And the second scenario is definitely NFTs though. NFTs is that's also been surprising where already in the last 6 weeks there's multiple NFT marketplaces, and some of these things are they're selling for $100,000, $200,000 dollars worth of mover tokens. So that was not expected either. I think there's just a large appetite for NFTs these days and for places to mint them.
Questions, just raise your hand. Gentleman over here on the left. Let's get right to you.
Thanks. So in particular, I wanted to ask about, so I can see the case for Moonbeam differentiating itself against other EVM environments using the precompiles and other sort of specializations in terms of connecting to other chains. But how do you see sort of Moonbeam and Moonriver differentiating from each other in the future? Like once, let's say once it's kind of everything's fully rolled out and it's more mature, you maybe don't so much need a kind of canary network. What's Moonriver's role and what's the relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and it goes a little bit into like, a related question is like, what's the purpose of Kusama when you have Polkadot? And I would say this, that as with many things, you create something with a certain idea, but then the market like tells you like something different, basically. And so I think that's the case here, where the original idea, we still believe is a good one, is that, I think Gav's original idea was, we need this environment that has real economic conditions, because it's impossible to like test software when you don't have that, right? You kind of need this, I mean, it's not right to call it a test environment, but they call it a canary net. We need a place where we can deploy software under real conditions, we can learn and kind of figure out, like, get lessons before we deploy like onto the quote unquote mainnet. So that was the original idea. I think that's a good idea. It's something that like, Polkadot spent a lot of time kind of building in upgradability features, right? So they want to be, they have, the tools are there to like upgrade a lot and be fast, but if you're going to be fast, you need to be safe also. So this is kind of one of the safety measures. Now, that being said, I think the lesson that we've learned is when you launch these things, they kind of have a mind of their own, right? So you engage a community, you engage a bunch of token holders, and whatever your ideas might be, the chain might have different ideas. So I think we've already seen that with Moonriver, where I fully expect there's going to be different communities around Moonriver and Moonbeam. And I mean, we want to continue to use it in this way, where we will ship software first to Moonriver. But I am starting to see that there's probably a potentially like a future where they're both like living in parallel and serving different use cases. So I think that one scenario, it's speculative, but one scenario that may happen is that gaming and NFT and certain NFT use cases like may kind of prefer Moonriver, whereas people that want kind of the like maximum security, like economic security, like may on DeFi and other scenarios may deploy to Moonbeam. So that's one idea, but I think we'll have to see. I mean, they're both like they're both on-chain governed, so it's kind of the will of the token holders is like what will decide the directions in some way.